Ogilvychange, I suppose, springs from, in part, from something I noticed back in about 1989, 1990, when working in direct marketing, that sometimes very small things you do will have immense effects. You might do some fairly complicated program for American Express where you relaunched, say, the Gold Card brand, and that would increase response from sort of 1.3% to 1.6%. 6 months later, without anybody making much fuss about it, someone would redesign the application form so the questions were in a slightly different order and the response rate would double. And I always believed back then that there was a kind of missing science in marketing, and didn't really know what to do with that instinct until about 20 years later, when reading suddenly books in the newly named science of behavioural economics. I realised there now was a name for this. It was called things like choice architecture, for example. And so I realised that if you get everything about your campaign right, everything about the advertising, the promotion, the positioning of your product, but the choice architecture of the form with which you sign up just isn't very good, it's only half as good as it could be, then that means, with a systems perspective, that everything else you're doing is half as effective. So we have a little slogan as Ogilvychange, which is dare to be trivial. One of the things that makes complex systems like markets different from mechanisms is that, rather like meteorology, there are butterfly effects. There are very small things you can do which have disproportionately large effects. And our job as Ogilvychange is to be, in part, butterfly hunters, looking for these little things that have, to some extent, just been ignored or not tested, either because people just think they're trivial, or because, in many cases, they're beneath the dignity of people to get involved in. You know, usually the design of the form is delegated to someone with not much power and discretion. And our job is to actually elevate the importance of these things and make sure they're right. Because if we don't get these things right, everything else we're doing is much less effective than it could be. Why Singapore? First of all, city-states, we think, are the perfect place to actually apply some of these learnings. They're places of the kind of size with a controlled, discrete economy where we think that behavioural science can be of importance not only in the marketing sphere but also in the public policy sphere. And we think that obviously advanced and forward-looking governments like this one will be particularly interested in this. There's also an element where I would argue that in the highly developed world, and Singapore is about as developed as you can get, the conventional economic approach to problems has kind of run out of road, that simply continuing to optimize existing conventional economic metrics will start to bump up against the kind of law of diminishing returns. The basics are all done extraordinarily well. What you need to look at now are kind of vastly more creative and oblique solutions to continue to improve things. I always say there are no rules in this business. In the social sciences and understanding how people behave, there aren't any rules, but there are patterns. We can find patterns of human behavior in one field of marketing activity and apply it somewhere else. You can use the knowledge and the insights this generates in everything from advertising to activation to direct marketing to digital to website design to search engine optimization. Marketing desperately needs a credible scientific vocabulary to back it up. Finance relies very heavily on economics for its vocabulary and its credibility. We haven't really had one of our own, and one of the reasons why being a marketer is so damn tiring is you've got to argue everything from scratch. You don't really have a body of evidence on which you can effectively rely and say, look at this QED. And we think behavioural science will provide us with that. We're very generous, we have a very collegiate spirit, and we'll actually effectively help our competitors just as they help us. But if there's one thing we do believe is we think Ogilvy can benefit from this more than anybody else, simply because of the breadth of our offering. Other agencies might be able to apply it in 1 or 2 ways, we can actually apply it in 10.